lawsuit or nah? Well, I will say this. I will be making a video talking more about it because obviously there's a lot to talk about. And I don't want to breadcrumb it.
Hello, and welcome to Stephen A. Sarch Talk. Sorry, this is Stephen Mindset. Think of this part of my channel as like Voidzilla, a space where I can just kind of talk about lawsuits without a lot of editing and, extreme motion graphics. This is just a place where I can kind of just talk, because there's a lot happening in the digital culture, legal space. Like right now, Destiny's affidavit just got leaked, and Mr. Beast is being sued by a former Beast Games contestant who claims that she was forced to delete her OnlyFans in order to compete in the Amazon game show. But today, what I want to talk about is the Ethan Klein versus iDubbbz lawsuit. Now, a couple weeks ago, I released my first video in this sort of vein and talked about the documents that I had obtained going through the lawsuit and kind of what's going on.
YouTuber Stephen A. Sark. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that.
Coming from Stephen A. Sarch this time. Some of the last ones came from Stephen A. Sarch, actually.
In this video, Stephen A. Sarch is very pleased with himself.
And the response was overwhelming. It was really interesting when a bunch of different creators all over the digital space just kind of like talk about you and look into your stuff. But I saw a few pieces of like misinfo off of that video that got shared around. And I wanted to talk about just one that really caught my eye, which was that Ethan Klein could not have dropped the lawsuit because he needed to have that settlement first. Ethan writes in the comments of the apology saying that, okay, I'm going to drop the case.
But it turns out he can't just drop the case. There has to be some sort of agreement.
And that isn't really true. Ethan Klein could have dropped the lawsuit at any time. If you look at the Alberta Rules of Court, after the discontinuance of claim, before a date is set for trial, a plaintiff may discontinue all or any part of an action against one or more defendants. So he could have at any time dropped it, but if he did, he would have had to pay Ian's legal fees. Because as you can see in point 4, a discontinuance under this rule must be in Form 23 and must be filed and served on each of the other parties, and after the plaintiff serves notice of discontinuance, the defendant is entitled to a costs award against the plaintiff for having defended against the discontinued claim. Now, do you think it's fair that Ethan would have to pay for Ian's lawyers if he dropped the lawsuit? That's entirely up to you. But this idea that Ethan couldn't have dropped it at all unless he got this settlement with all of these 20 plus different facets that needed to be filed through is just like complete hogwash, and definitely got spread by a few conspiratorial Barbies online. But, what I want to talk about today is the August 18th court hearing, I guess, that kind of talks about what goes on. But first, I think we kind of need to go a recap of this lawsuit and kind of how we got here. On February 17th, Ian, as a dragon, posted Destiny's claiming Ethan was, touching his kids and being inappropriate. Gross statement, not a fan, but he did it and he put it up. And before any of this happened, on May 9th, Ian issued his first apology on stream. The apology, it was just him kind of distancing himself. He says he was retiring the character, but he kind of moved on. But on June 5th, 2026, that's when Ethan Klein filed the lawsuit against iDubbbz for this statement. He also sued Anisa for a separate statement that we'll get into later on, but that's when things really started to go. And June 15th, Ian decided he was going to release his own apology video. And if you look on his channel, that apology is actually one of the most successful videos, might even be the most successful video he's had in quite a long time outside of the H3 content, Cop Nuke. So, he just did that of his own. But after June 15th, Ian's and Ethan's lawyers start talking behind the scenes to discuss a settlement, because under that second apology video, Ethan wrote that he is, going to drop the suit that he's ready for the apology was good, and he was going to drop the suit. But behind the scenes, he really wasn't planning on just dropping the suit. He wanted a settlement. So they were kind of discussing these settlement terms. And, you know, I went into it in the last video, so I'm not going to recap it here. But I do want to talk about Ian's third apology and kind of how important it was. Because this apology on July 2nd has basically been wiped from the internet. No one really has it. It's only in this affidavit. So I decided I kind of just want to read it here, and just because it's going to be really important to understand how the August 18th hearing went. So what Ian said on the July 2nd stream was, for the H3 podcast, I was definitely getting sucked into the cycle. Sort of the bad parts, the ugly parts of online discourse. And I really don't want to be part of that. I feel bad that I was engaging in that. It's easy to get roped into it, and I don't want to be that person. I think it's worth acknowledging. There's been commentary around Noah Samsen, Frogan, all these people who are also dealing with lawsuits, and they're all in very different situations. I certainly don't want people to see my apology and see any of this as a reflection of how other people need to behave, because this is my world, and this is what I wanted to do for myself. I very much want to get back into making content that is more reflective of who I want to be, what drives me, what motivates me, and I think getting lost in the online back and forth, getting involved in these communities, because it's such a slippery slope, especially for me. It's hard, right? Because you get so emotionally invested in things. You just want to be heard. You just want there to be resolution. That's what I want a lot of the time. And in the pursuit for the resolution, you can say and do some ugly stuff. You can be involved in things that are just very ugly. I want to distance myself from that sort of stuff. Anything that involves people's personal lives, because Anisa and I have both been a big target of it, whether it be Kiwi Farms or anything else. There's been a lot of stuff that I have not liked. It's very personal, really gross. It's hard to not want to react back in a lot of these instances, but I think it's important to not and get back into my own lane, for lack of a better word. So I think I'm going to try harder to just make good content and not get pulled down into this drama slump, because I still think it's important to defend the defenseless and stick up for people, and fair, good criticism is important, and I do think holding people accountable is important, but I don't want to get sloppy with it, you know? That apology comes out July 2nd on his stream. It was what they were discussing. And before that apology happened, there were conversations between Ethan Klein's lawyer and Ian's lawyers, as I said. And this is what Ethan Klein's lawyer said. It's in the affidavit before it. Consistent with your instructions that Ian Jomha must denounce the Snark community or express regret for participating in it, but the wording and format are at his discretion. Ian has agreed to make a statement on his Thursday, July 2nd livestream along the lines of, participating in Snark communities for bad faith to harass or by picking on people's families is bad, and state in a manner that is clear that is including himself, i.e. that his participation is included in the statement and was bad. Now, does the above statement include enough about participating in Snark communities? That is what this court hearing was about, is to figure out if the agreement, that again was in the last video, holds up and stands in court. Because did it, talk about the Snark communities? That's what the lawyers discussed, went back and forth on to kind of figure all of that out. Because what we learned from the court is that court denied the application for enforced settlement. So that agreement that, I posted that's been going around online, the court denied it, saying that it doesn't hold water. According to Ian's lawyers, he said that his apology, that July 2nd one I just read, actually fulfilled the agreement. But Ethan's lawyers, they disagreed, saying that Ian did not denounce Snark. He did not denounce the Snark communities. He didn't say the word Snark. And because there was no specific language in the agreement, it was just sort of up to the discretion, as the lawyer in all of this said. See, it's up to the discretion. But the wording and format are at his discretion. So it's actually entirely up to Ethan if he's going to take this thing at all, if it's going to count. And Ethan disagreed. So the judge felt that the agreement was subjective, so it wasn't fulfilled. So it just had to keep going. So I filed in the courts again to get more information, more documents, but nothing had been actually added to the docket. The only thing, as you can see, that's different than the previous one is that on the 18th of August, it says that the case was heard, or that the hearing was heard, and that the black spots are the judge's name and the action numbers. But that's really all that we got in terms of new information. There's nothing been filed yet, at least that I've been able to access. But we do know what happened because Anisa, on one hand, has been talking about it in her Instagram stories, which we'll get to in a bit. But there was someone who was at the courthouse who was taking notes. Now, I saw this Reddit post and was, of course, skeptical. You never trust something you just see online as, you know, the end-all be-all. But I do find it interesting what they said. You know, they got the judge's name right, which I had not posted online. So I decided to reach out to them and, you know, ask for a bit more confirmation. You know, I did my due diligence. They were like, "Are you a journalist?" I'm like, "Yes." It happens from time to time. But they gave me the case number, which again, I hadn't posted online. They had the judge in there. And the notes seemed to line up with what Anisa was posting afterwards. So, like, though this statement shouldn't be taken as 100% fact, I think it's interesting enough to kind of look at here. And as long as you're mildly skeptical, I think the justification behind it is good enough. So what they wrote is that the judge denied the application to enforce settlement. The court found real doubt as to whether a settlement was actually concluded. Courts can fill gaps in a contract on an objective basis, but only where the parties intended an objective standard to apply. Here, the parties didn't set an objective standard. The standard was whether Ian's statement was subjectively satisfactory to Ian. The statement needed to be satisfactory to one person, and that was Mr. Klein. And that's really where Ian and Anisa screwed up on this one, in my opinion. They were not specific enough in the language when it came to the settlement. They needed to have basically a script in order to make it so that, like, Ethan could not, you know, say that this didn't count. Like, if you look at the Casey-tron, you know, apology, you know, settlement video, the reason it sounds so rehearsed, in my opinion, I have no evidence behind this is just something I'm theorizing, is that because it had to be written verbatim to make sure everything was okay and that the settlement would count.
The lawsuit was not frivolous. When I said the lawsuit was frivolous and based on misogyny, it was to garner sympathy, protect my own reputation, and retaliate against the Kleins.
It can't be subjective. You really need to have everything in writing when it comes to this sort of stuff. And, you know, it just kind of went from there. So I contacted this person, and they said that they were going to share their notes with me. And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's great. I would love to see them." And then they posted them to the subreddit. So I guess the internet can sort of thank me for getting this stuff out. But there were some things in the notes that I wanted to get to, because I think they speak directly to that, again, July 2nd statement, which is kind of the whole point of all of this. You know, Ian's lawyers were very specific and said that these are the reasons that the apology counted and that the settlement should stand and that the agreement should stand. It talks about the bad and ugly parts of online discords. Ian's lawyers also said that this was the most challenge she has faced in trying to reach a settlement with a party. Again, I would not directly quote it, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's what she said. But again, does the bad parts and ugly parts of online discourse count to denouncing Snark? If you're describing Snark specifically as Snark communities, no. At least that's subjectively how they feel about it. And then we have, "I felt bad I was engaging in it," which is the statement Blanchard says meets that requirement from the agreement that expressed Ian needed to include his own participation as something that was negative. You think getting lost in the online back and forth? This is part of the apology in reference to the Snark communities. Again, is that count as Snark? Snark, again, by Ethan Klein's definition and those of his community, in my opinion, because there's never really actually been a direct definition of Snark. It's been very nebulous about what it is. But, like, Snark is something that is very specific to them. That it is a community of Redditors who shit talk them and do other things. It could potentially be linked to the CPS call that they received or the skulls they received at their houses. All of this is, what Snark kind of is. And Ian, in that statement, does not say that Snark is bad. He does not mention the word snark. He implies to what the traditional definition of the term snark could be, in that it's like people shit-talking each other, but he doesn't actually say snark. And because he doesn't condemn those specific snark communities, that's what these lawyers are kind of arguing, that the agreement doesn't hold up, and none of it really matters in all of this. And when you look at Ethan's lawyers, they were like, he was required to say these things. He was required to use the specific term snark community. It was in the affidavit and it was in the talks. He needed to use the term snark community. And the fact that he didn't is enough to kind of like break the thing. It doesn't count. The agreement doesn't count because he doesn't say snark community. And the judge actually kind of agreed. Well, let's go back to this. So the fact, I thought this part was kind of funny. The only sticking point on my end is Ian's refusal to denounce the identified Reddit Snark community. His lawyer said that was a deal breaker for Ian. The settlement is conditional on Ian stating that he regrets participating in a Snark community genuinely with no reference to the named community. A Snark community with reference, it targeted Ethan Klein or H3 Stark. People gasping behind me. Ethan is not willing to move unless there is at least a reference to option A. Now, again, he didn't mention the Snark community. This, like Ethan said, it was kind of being held up by one tiny little sticking point.
Listen, it's a bunch of technical bullshit. It's just we're in negotiating the terms of the settlement still, and that's it. I don't know. It's what it is. You know what I mean?
And he's not really wrong here. Ian could have mentioned the Snark community, but for some reason we do not know, he just decided not to. And that kind of led to all of this legal rigmarole. I still believe Ethan Klein should not have filed the lawsuit to begin with, and he could have settled without any of this stuff. But Ian not getting in direct writing what that settlement was supposed to be is why they are in this place. If they had just bent the knee and said the Snark stuff, I don't think any of this would have been happening. It wouldn't have been a problem. But here we go. And now we have the judge. According to what this Redditor said, the judge said that this situation leaves me with some doubt in relation to whether the settlement was concluded or not. And since the court is required to fill on the objective basis, and that because this agreement was more of a subjective basis, there's no reason for them to basically uphold the agreement. If Ethan Klein doesn't say that the agreement is done, then the agreement is not done by the court's definition. They could have, again, none of this needed to happen, but Ethan Klein is ultimately the one with the power here because Ian and Anisa just were not specific enough in their language. Say what you will about the case, that is objectively what's happening here. We also know what happened because Anisa, for reasons I do not understand, decided to post about it on her IG story. I will say, a tip for anyone getting sued, don't make posts about it. Don't do it. The internet is not here to be your courtroom. The courtroom is there to be your courtroom. I understand you want people to kind of side with whatever you're thinking, but just shut up. At least that would be what I do, is I just shut up. But Anisa posted, to clarify, yes, I am also named in the defamation lawsuit that is seeking $1 million. We are both being sued by Ethan Klein, me specifically for tweeting drugs. Now, I wanna put a pin in the second one, but on the first one, the lawsuit is seeking $1 million. Now, I think that is partially my fault, why that's kind of a thing. The settlement itself, or the lawsuit, said that it was seeking up to $1 million. Like, they weren't seeking $1 million max. It was just like, that's kind of legalese for just doing it. So If that, came about because of my video, I apologize, but that's kind of how I've seen it. I've been speaking to lawyers behind the scenes to kind of get a better sense of this case, rather than, I am not a lawyer, I am a journalist. Let me make that perfectly clear. But I have been speaking to lawyers to kind of understand all of this stuff and get more of an understanding rather than keep talking. But I wanted to read the next one. People rightfully are confused on whether Ethan dropped the lawsuit or not. The short answer is no. The apology which Ian did truly of his own volition, without any instructions from Ethan's legal team, was not enough for Ethan to actually drop it. That's all I'm choosing to say at this moment. Did he drop it? No. Did he say he would drop it publicly? Yes. And, that's true. That's true, He didn't drop it, and he said he would drop it. But, it's that is what it is. I'm trying to be less opinionated in this one, okay? Just kind of let it go, because I don't want to... People on the internet are weird. That's what I've kind of learned. I want to go back to the last thing Anisa said, which is me specifically for tweeting drugs. Now, that is not actually what it says in the court filings. It says, on or about March 24th, Anisa published a statement suggesting Mr. Klein was on drugs on one of his videos, stating, "Bro is on something here. His pupils look as big as his iris. He's cooked." That was on a live stream, not in a tweet.
Bro is on something here.
Yeah.
For sure he's on drugs. Look at his eyes.
He does not normally look like that.
His pupils look like they're as big as his iris.
Yeah.
But Anisa, realizing that, saying wrong things in a lawsuit, even though she just said that was the last thing she was going to say, added one more story to the mix. More solid clarification. Sorry on my part. The specific wording in the suit is a quote from me commenting on the tweet I had made previously in passing in Ian's live stream. Here's the reason why I am included in the lawsuit. Yeah, it was the live stream, not the tweet. She did tweet drugs, which was tied to this, but again, that is not what it is mentioned in the lawsuit. At least from what I've been able to see. Now, why I don't have the transcript. Because you can actually get the transcript from the courthouse, and I wouldn't have to rely on a Redditor in order to do it. But unfortunately, it costs quite a lot. So I contacted the court after I got sent that, being like, how do I get the transcript? And they're like, first you have to pay another $25 to get the clerk's notes, which have the timestamps, to kind of figure that out. And then you have to file those timestamps to get a transcript. Now, I would want the transcript pretty fast. So it would cost about 8 cents a character. That means a letter. So if I wanted, every time they said the word snark, it would cost me $3 or so. And that's hundreds of dollars to get a transcript for a YouTube video that I don't know how well is gonna do. So I will say that if you want to see the transcript, I am willing to shell out to get it if I can kind of crowdfund it from the community. So if you're interested, think of throwing me a super chat or potentially joining my memberships, which I just launched recently and I'm super happy with. But I do want to kind of end with a little opinion, a little thought on this case, as someone who is not a law tuber but pretending to not be one. I think Ian and Anisa really screwed up by not being specific in the language with their apology. I think they should have not let it be subjective. They should have had very specific language of what he could have said. I don't know if Ian wanted to do, I don't know if his pivot to empathy made sure he can't read statements or what have you, but it definitely made it seem that he could have just, again, read his and moved on with his life. But again, that's also bending the knee to Ethan. And I don't think that's what anybody really wants to do. Again, that's my problem, in my opinion, is this feels so bullying. It feels like Ian said something about Ethan's kids, so it's fair game. The pettiness is totally allowed. You can do whatever the hell you want because you went after his family. And I think there's a lot of pieces of the fandom that agree with that, yeah, you shouldn't have said that about Ethan's kids, so now whatever happens to you is justified. Especially since there's this massive lolcow culture around iDubbbz, where people feel betrayed by what he's turned into, so they can just kind of feel like they can get away with a lot of this stuff. None of it really makes sense, but I think at the end of the day, this lawsuit's just gonna keep going. Like, this was going to be the ending for the moment, but since it didn't end, this is going to go to 2027. This is going to be a long, drawn-out thing to figure out the defamation claims. And, like, nobody wants a long, drawn-out defamation lawsuit. That's, like, scary stuff. That's hurtful and can, like, you know, completely steal all the money you have. But that's what's happening, and I'm not sure that is good for, like, the internet in general. I don't think these lawsuits are healthy for the internet. I just think this is kind of what we're dealing with. But you know what? Let me know how you feel about the lawsuit in the comments. I'm really excited to just kind of get your thoughts. My name has been Stephen A. Sarch. I am a journalist, not a lawyer, and thank you for watching Steven Mindset. Okay, bye.